up in our number 10 spot, we have the cornfield. This story is about how someone believes that they may have somehow accidentally ended up in a universe similar to the one that they're used to, but this new one has just small changes that are beginning to freak them out a bit. They explain, quote, "So I live by a cornfield and have noticed small changes in my world, and the most major change I noticed just hours ago was that my entire house was on the other side of the street. I go home from school the same way every day. I end up going down my road, then turning right into my driveway. Today I went home the exact same way, but when I was getting ready to turn right, I noticed a cornfield. So I pull over to see what happened, then I turned around and noticed my house was on the completely opposite side of the road. I think my world is changing more than I first thought." Has something like this happened to anyone else? I mean, I have the same question now. Has this ever happened to any of you guys? I honestly wouldn't even know what to do. In our number 9 spot today, we have the hotel room. This story starts out with the storyteller explaining that this strange story happened when they were on a family road trip. They write, quote, "We stayed at a hotel for a night. Our room was nothing more than 2 beds and a restroom with a big mirror across from the beds. Everyone went to sleep but me. I stayed up playing a mobile game I was addicted to at the time. At about 2 AM, I went to sleep. When I woke up, I noticed something was just ever so slightly off. The mirror was gone, the room had 2 separate bedrooms, and there were 3 beds. Apparently I was the only one who noticed it because my family called me crazy. Still confused to this day as to what happened." It's the small changes like this that would have me absolutely freaking out, because it seems small but you know something is off and different. I don't blame them for still remembering this day and questioning what exactly happened here. In our number 8 spot today, we have a new phone. Okay. This one wouldn't be the weirdest one in the world, but it has to do with the lost phone, and I just can't get over how strange the place they found it was. So they write, quote, "My friend and I were talking to our roommate and her girlfriend one night. Roommate had just received her new phone and was sitting in bed using it while the 4 of us chatted. So roommate sat her phone down while we were all still chatting. She goes to pick it back up and it's gone. Like, she had just put it down for a few minutes tops before she noticed that the thing had poofed. I call it for her and we can't hear it. We take the comforter and the sheets off the bed, shake them all out, we look under the bed, behind it, everywhere we can. That phone is gone. Even though we hadn't left her room at all during our conversation when the phone disappeared. We tore apart the whole apartment trying to find it. Finally, we decided to try her car. It was locked in the trunk. We live on the 3rd floor and we were all in the same room watching her use it before it somehow teleported." There's something about finding anything in a locked trunk that seems kind of eerie and creepy, and couple this with how the whole thing is seemingly impossible, and you've got a lot of unanswered questions here. In our number 7 spot today, we have a server's nightmare. This story starts out with someone explaining that it comes from a time many years ago when they worked as a server at a restaurant. The memory begins with the quintessential server panic experience, where their coworker forgot to punch in the food order for a 3-top. If you work in the service industry, you know the absolute panic that sets in, especially if you're like me and never write things down. You can't go back and ask these people what they had when their food should already be out and on the table. It's a panic like none other. Anyway, so this coworker not only forgot to punch in the food, but also of course forgot what the order was. This storyteller was laughing at their stressed coworker who was obviously trying to figure out what to do, and while laughing at him, the storyteller threw out a random order at them. They said, quote, "It was probably fried mozzarella, a cheeseburger with no onions, and chicken fingers." While the storyteller was joking and just having fun, it turns out that somehow this was the exact order that the table had ordered and the person needed. It totally freaked the storyteller out, and they even made their coworker let them run the food to the table to make sure that he wasn't making it up. Turns out the storyteller was right and probably saved their coworker a lot of stress and hassle. In our number 6 spot today, we have the camp photo. This story comes from someone who has always remembered this strange thing that happened years ago when they were 12 years old and at camp. They explained that they were taking a photo on a disposable camera because cell phones were still in the flip phone phase, and considering the fact that they were 12, even if they weren't, it's not like they had a cell phone anyway. So with this disposable camera, they were taking a picture of 2 of their friends that they had made while at camp. This is all fine and well, of course, and honestly very cute, but it's what's seen in the photo that really has stuck with this person. They explained that in the photo, one of the friends appears twice in two entirely different poses. They explain that it still weirds them out every time they come across it. In our number 5 spot today we have Employee of the Month. This story comes from someone who almost had a premonition of sorts. They explain, quote, "I was sitting in my office one day when my desk phone rang, and it is my undersheriff asking me to bring him all of the reports, dispatch logs, any documentation reference to a specific case, so I get it all together and start towards his office. I meet him in the hallway and hand him the paperwork. He asked me what it was. I told him it's the blank documentation you asked for. He then swears he never asked me for it, that he had just arrived and had not called my office. He was on his way down the hall to ask me to get it together." I mean, at the very least I hope he gave this person a raise, because while this certainly was a weird experience, that's also the most efficient employee I've ever heard of. I hope that's not the new work standard though. Like, what do you mean you didn't anticipate my needs? In our number 4 spot today we have The Repeater. This story is one that only lasted for about an hour, but it definitely was a strange and confusing hour for the person who experienced it. Basically, it started when they were watching TV with friends and they ended up landing on some sort of old 80s movie that they used to watch many years prior but hadn't seen in quite some time. All of the dialogue from the movie came flooding back to them and they remembered what each character was going to say next. Not so weird, our brains work in mysterious ways. This, however, seemed to open some sort of gate, because when they changed channels and were trying to find something new to watch, this person was now able to recite every line of dialogue prior to it being said, as if they had memorized it all, but this time it was with shows they had never seen before in their life. This then translated into them being able to predict what their friends were about to say right before them saying it. Again, this strange effect only lasted for about an hour before things returned to normal, but what a strange hour that would have been. In our number 3 spot today we have The Inside Scoop. Maybe this is a parallel universe story, or maybe this person is just a bit of a clairvoyant or something of that nature, but whatever you want to call it, this story is definitely a weird one. They write, quote, "Sometimes I'll be talking to someone I've never met and very specific facts about them will pop into my consciousness out of nowhere, like this person had a golden retriever that died in 2009. Then they'll inevitably bring up the fact that I mentioned without me saying anything first, sometimes seconds later, sometimes years. This would be so strange and also so hard to navigate. You'd have all these things you seemingly happen to know about this person and now you have to avoid bringing them up until they do. It's like knowing someone's secret. That would be really weird. If you had this sort of ability, would you tell people or would you keep it to yourself?" In our number 2 spot today we have The Wake Up Call. This story comes from someone who is explaining a very scary moment that their brother experienced that is kind of unexplainable. They start off by saying that it doesn't seem as though their mom believes this story, but they definitely do. Most of that is because they saw their brother after this incident and could definitely tell that something had seriously spooked him. They write, quote, "He was sitting in the passenger seat driving home alongside my mom. A bright green car swerved and hit them, knocking bits and pieces of glass into his arm. He jolted awake afterwards, just in time to see the green car pass them. He claimed he felt the marks the glass left afterwards too." So basically, this guy might have somehow been in a reality where this accident really did happen, and then was able to jump realities to one with a better outcome. Or perhaps he was just temporarily transported to the other one before jumping back into this one. The possibilities really are endless when it comes to the multiverse, and I can totally understand how an experience like this would have somebody pretty shaken up. Whatever really happened here, I'm just glad that this person somehow ended up in the timeline where everything is a-okay. In our number 1 spot today we have The Boiler Repairs. This story is a bit of a longer one, but it's so strange and truly like nothing I've ever heard before. It absolutely shocked me. This person wrote, quote, "This didn't happen to me, but to my dad. He works for a heating and air conditioning company, so he often has to go out to people's houses to fix things. About 5 years ago he told me he had a bizarre dream where he went on a call to an elderly woman's house. He'd never seen the house or this woman before, but he said it was bizarre because of how realistic the whole thing felt. He fixed her boiler in the dream, chatted for a bit, and then left. About a week later his company gets a call from an elderly woman needing her boiler fixed. They sent my dad on the job. When he arrived, he said it was the exact same house from his dream and the same old lady. He knew her name before before he even had to ask, and knew his way around the house without having gone inside yet. When she opened the door, she said, "Hi Gary," and when he asked how she already knew his name, she said she had a dream last week that her boiler broke and that my dad is the one who came to fix it, so she just knew that would be his name. Two complete strangers never having met each other had the exact same dream that they would meet each other, and they did. The whole thing is so crazy. That would be so strange, but also so cool. It's almost like they were destined to meet each other in some way. Honestly, the unexplainable can be terrifying, but it can also be kind of nice and cool and truly mystifying. All I want to know now is if Gary and the elderly woman kept in touch.
Starting off this countdown, we have the hit and run. One day, a woman named Julie was out shopping with her daughter Lily. While out, Lily unexpectedly turned to her mom and said, "That car hit me." She pointed to one of the cars in the parking lot. She asked her daughter what she meant, and she continued on saying, and I quote, "Before I lived with you and daddy, I lived with another mommy and daddy." She continued on saying she remembers her blood running cold. Now that's pretty dark for a 4-year-old to say, but she didn't stop there. Over the course of that day, she kept telling about how she died. She remembered seeing a red car, being hit, and then seeing ambulances. She also remembers her feet hurting. And her daughter got more and more uncomfortable as she started recounting more information. So Julie believes that her daughter was remembering memories from her past life. I don't even know what to say about this one. Like, that's pretty terrifying for the daughter and the mom.
In our number 9 spot today, we have a reverse in time. This is a story that was posted to Reddit with the title Reverse in Time, which of course had me intrigued right off the bat. They start off by explaining that they have had two weird, sort of unexplainable things happen to them recently, and they explain that the first one happened when they gifted their boyfriend one of those chocolate oranges. They gave it to him because they remembered that his mom gave him one for Christmas every single year for their 8-year relationship, and she knew that he loved them. She saw an opportunity to get one and thought it might be a nice little surprise. Here's where the weird thing comes in though. When she gives it to him, he has no idea what it is. He claims that he had never seen one nor had one of these chocolate oranges before and was completely bewildered, and then when he tried it, he hated it. Okay, definitely a little suspicious, but maybe they just got something mixed up. Then they go on to tell this story. Quote, "I had just gotten out of the grocery store and was pushing my cart towards my car when all of a sudden I looked down and the cart was gone. I looked around and I wasn't even in the store parking lot anymore. I was in a parking lot of an apartment complex that my best friend moved out of years ago. The other thing that was freaky was my car keys were completely different. To be exact, they were the keys to my car that I had in 2015. I looked around, panicked, and actually saw my old car. I had a rubber duck on the dashboard of that car and the same duck was there. I remember feeling my stomach drop and an overwhelming feeling of dread at this realization. This was a horrible time in my life and I would do anything to not have to relive it. Then my ears started ringing and my head started hurting like a migraine was coming on, so I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was back in the grocery store parking lot with the correct keys and my current car. I can't explain this and I'm still confused by this. I'm confused by this and I didn't even have to live it. I can't even imagine." In our number 8 spot today, we have the CUDI effect. This is one story that might be a parallel universe story, or maybe it's one sign of the Mandela effect. I'm wondering if anyone else shares this same memory with this person, so once you hear the story, let us know down below in the comments. We all know how often it happens that someone will start circulating a fake death claim about a celebrity on the internet. It happens all of the time for some morbid reason. The storyteller explains that they know this and assure all of us that this is not the case in their situation. They say that they remember the artist Kid Cudi passing away sometime in 2018 or 2019. They say that they can remember seeing it on the news and it being shared on social media and everyone was really upset. So flash forward to just a couple days ago and they hear their sister talking about the new Kanye West and Kid Cudi drama that has been going on, and they say it's weird that Kanye would have beef with Cudi since he died. This is when they go on to Google it and realize now that they can't find any news on Kid Cudi passing away, and that is of course because whatever timeline we're in, that never happened. It would definitely be a conflicting feeling to have this clear memory that you swear is real, but everything around you is telling you it's not. In our number 7 spot today, we have the missing typewriter. This story comes from Reddit and they write, quote, "As a kid I remember having a typewriter and I remember I used to love typing nonsense on it. Pretend files and telegrams programs. A few years ago I bought a typewriter from eBay and I asked my mom about that typewriter and she had no idea what I was talking about. I asked my dad and he had no idea. I asked my cousins who I remember using it with and they had no idea. I remember so well it's frightening. That was years ago. I still don't understand. I also remember a few other things like having a desk and chair in my bedroom. Also, no one remembers that. And there are many pictures of me in my room as a kid, yet none exist of these little memories I have. Is it possible I passed through a parallel universe after my childhood? Does anyone else have childhood memories that never happened? Childhood items that never existed? That's a great question. I had a teddy bear called Ears that my dog destroyed one year, but if I call my dad and find out that he never existed, I would be pretty confused. It's a small thing, but I can totally understand why this would be a very weird feeling. In our number 6 spot today, we have an alternate world. This story starts off with them explaining that ever since they were a teenager, they dreamed of this alternate life they have where they go to university and work in the city. It started around age 16 and they are now 25. They say that this other life is really detailed, like it basically is like living an entirely other life. They then go on to write, quote, "Last night I was feeling sick and in return had one of the most vivid dreams I had in a long time. I met someone and developed a deep relationship that felt incredibly emotional and real. Luckily I woke up right when I was trying to navigate Google Maps to drive to a park, so I remember the street we were on. It was called Dutch Island Road. Never heard of it in real life, so I decided to look it up. The only thing that popped up was a rural area in Rhode Island. It wasn't exactly the same layout of roads I remembered on the map, but the nature and area look eerily similar to what I saw while driving. I started looking around the area, clicking different locations, and started to freak out at how everything looks just like in my dream. Mind you, I've never been to Rhode Island, but the weirdest part is that specific buildings in the Rhode Island University and Warwick are the ones I see in my dream all the time." What? How could they have so accurately dreamed of something they had never seen in real life? They go on to say, quote, "I've always thought my dreams were a glimpse of living in an alternate universe, and I feel like this detail solidifies the potential of it being a reality." In our number 5 spot today, we have New Year, New World. This story is one that starts off with a bang. Quite literally. It starts off on New Year's Eve 2020 when the storyteller was about to leave work and fell down a flight of stairs. They broke their nose when it hit the concrete stair, and despite this obviously terrible injury, they explained that they think they actually died in their old universe and somehow transferred over into this one where they were able to survive their injuries. They say they've started to notice slight changes, like the mask they were wearing when the fall occurred. They remember being filled and basically ruined with blood from their injury, but suddenly they find this mask in their bag perfectly clean with no evidence of the fall. Also, the spot where the fall occurred clearly hadn't been cleaned due to the presence of other dirt and debris, but following the incident, there was no blood there either. This is especially weird considering the steps were concrete, so you think that there would be some sort of evidence. They go on to write about how they then began to notice small changes in those around them, with the biggest one being in reference to their mom. When they were a child, they remember their mother having breast cancer and thankfully being able to overcome it. After the fall, and when they believed they transferred universes, they were speaking to their mother on the phone and somehow got on the topic when their mother seemed really confused and explained that she had never had cancer or really anything of the sort. They remember it so well they even remember passing notes about it to their friends in class and worrying about it for months. They were of course happy to hear that their mother's healthy, but how could they possibly have this memory too? It's definitely all very strange. In our number 4 spot today, we have Somehow. This story comes from Reddit and they quickly start off by explaining that somehow, suddenly, they don't know when or how it happened, but they just woke up in a universe that wasn't their own. They have a few examples of how they know this. Some are a little more bizarre than others, but they're all examples nonetheless. So basically they start by explaining that a statue in their town isn't where they remember it being. The next example is that they remember harvest mites or berry bugs, and they remember and have actually had multiple occasions of them burying themselves into their skin, but in our timeline or universe, that isn't what those bugs do. Those were the more out there reasons, but the others consist of memories they have of childhood that have never happened, a movie they used to watch a bunch of times no longer existing anymore, and now they are suddenly friends and acquaintances with a bunch of people they'd never even met before. Certain things about their wife are different, including the ring she wears, and some foods are tasting different to them. It seems as though one day they woke up in a slightly altered universe from the one they were living in before. In our number 3 spot today, we have The Cemetery. This story comes from Reddit and it was posted with the title, quote, "I think my kids and I may have traveled to an alternate universe." They write about how a couple months ago they and their kids were walking through and around a cemetery. Their children are 13 and 9, and during their little walk they ended up heading through the entire cemetery and they came across a small beautiful mausoleum. They remember it so well that they even noted how the last person to be placed within the mausoleum happened about 50 years prior. So then, a few weeks later, they were walking through the cemetery again with their kids, but this time they brought their mom as well. I know, I'm also questioning why this family likes to take strolls through a cemetery, but they do say that they do this to ground them. Anyway, the kids began to tell their grandmother about the mausoleum they saw last time and asked if they could show her and visit it again. But when they go and try and find the mausoleum, it isn't anywhere. They search for at least half an hour and with no luck, they ask someone who helps tend to the area and he says that no such thing exists. They say that the cemetery is small enough that there should be no issue locating it, but it just doesn't seem to exist at all anymore. Both she and her kids remember what it looked like so clearly, so how could it have just disappeared? Now they've got me thinking that this mausoleum was somehow a portal to another reality. In our number 2 spot today we have the eclipse. This story originally took place in 2017 during the eclipse. The storyteller is located in Virginia, and based on that, they wouldn't get to experience the total eclipse but would see some of it. They go on to write, quote, "I had just gotten off of work and entered my apartment. The time was 2:15 p.m. and the eclipse wouldn't happen for another half hour. I decided to change my clothes and take a quick nap. I set an alarm clock for 20 minutes and drifted off to sleep. I also want to note that I was living on my own. When I woke up, it felt like at least an hour had passed. I was really disappointed because I wanted to experience the eclipse. I looked at the time on my phone and no time had passed. It was 2:20 p.m. I thought I'd stay awake instead and sit on my porch, but when I had gotten out and sat down, I noticed it was dead quiet. Nothing. I heard no cars, I saw no neighbors, I didn't see a single bird. I wasn't asleep. I tested it. I left my apartment and my complex and nothing. I walked to the stores across from me and they were all closed. There was no wind rustling through the leaves on the trees. I could not even find an ant. I tried to call people on my contact list and everything went to voicemail. It was as though every living being stopped existing. Throughout my adventure, the eclipse darkened and lightened the sky. I went back home, I sat on my couch, the rest of the day continued. I went to sleep that night. When I woke up, it was 3 p.m. on the same day. The eclipse had just ended. I missed my alarm. It was like it never happened. I've been waiting to tell this story for the longest. I have no idea where I was, but that place was just as real as this dimension. I don't know where they went, but they swear it wasn't of this earth anymore. Whether it was another planet, another dimension, or something else entirely, I'll never know. Maybe it was just a really strange and vivid dream, but at this point, who knows for sure. In our number 1 spot today we have 3 years. This is a story that the person telling it explained is something that has made them feel as if they are going crazy for the last 3 years, but once they began to read other stories of similar experiences, they're beginning to think it's a sign that they are in a parallel universe to the one that they grew up in. They say that for 3 years they've been trapped in a body that is not their own. They say, quote, "I am in my body, but just not the size I was. I weighed 540 pounds and was 5'6", but now I'm 260 pounds and 5'10". Not a big difference in height, but the weight is noticeable. I did not have a family, but now I have many children and a grandchild. This took some time getting used to. I never served in the military, but in this life I served for 4 years and went to college on a GI Bill. Zero memories of this time in my life, but I did go to the same school on a scholarship in my life." They go on to say that they've just been basically faking it for the last few years and aren't sure where the real and the fake ends. They always just feel a little out of step with this world and they don't quite feel comfortable in their own skin. They've tried to get back into their other life, but just can't seem to figure out how. Starting off in our number 10 spot we have tea time. This story comes from someone who has a very strange memory from when they were around 9 years old. They were eating dinner in their room for some reason that they can't quite remember. What they do remember, however, is being sat at their dresser, which had a big mirror. While sitting there, the storyteller's dad came in to check on them and asked if they wanted more tea, to which they replied yes. They picked up their empty teacup and handed it to him and watched as he walked out the door. In the next instant, they looked back over and saw their same teacup completely full of tea right where they had just picked up the one that was empty. They of course asked their dad about this after because what in the world is going on, and their dad said that he never came into their room at all. This story is bizarre for sure, but there's also something really eerie about it as well. I can totally see why this was one that really stuck with them.
In our 9th spot today, we have the life in India. Back in 2009, a young boy from Canada went to his parents' hometown in India for the first time. But as he was there, he started to grow really uncomfortable. He got to the point where he didn't even recognize his own mother and father, and insisted he belonged to another family. He also insisted that he had been to this hometown before, claiming that that was where he was born and raised. In fact, he eventually was able to describe his old home in immense detail. He proceeded to say that his name was Ram, and that he passed away at the age of 29 from a hole in the heart. He also claims that he had 3 brothers and a sister. While using the description, they were actually able to locate a real family there that matched the boy's description. In fact, the man's name was Ram, and he passed away 30 years prior to the boy being born. He too also had 3 brothers and a sister. That is just some freaky crap right there. In our 8th spot, we have Arthur Flowerdew. When Arthur Flowerdew was a kid, he would have detailed dreams about a large city surrounded by a desert. He remembered there being a temple, a canyon, streets, and buildings. He even remembered the exact way that this city was laid out. Well, he thought nothing of it until he was older and was watching a documentary about the ancient city of Petra. He immediately recognized the place. It was the city he saw in his dreams as a kid. He actually ended up flying to the city, but before that, he was quizzed by an archaeologist who knew about the city in great detail. Arthur got all the questions right, as if he had been there before. When he arrived, he was able to point out major landmarks and revealed information about the place without doing prior research. Plus, he knew information about the ancient city that no normal person would have known. So, it's believed that Arthur once lived there in his past life. Coming in at number 7, we have Virginia Woolf. This next girl might have been famous writer Virginia Woolf in her past life, or in another universe, whatever you want to believe. Basically, when this girl was 12, she would have dreams about being underwater and seeing faces underwater. No one thought much of it until she couldn't stop talking about Virginia Woolf. Like she knew way too much facts about her without even doing research on her. So her mom decided to do some digging of her own. And that's when she found that the same night that her daughter was having those dreams was the anniversary of Virginia's death. How did she die? By drowning herself. Not only that, there are a lot of similarities that Virginia and this girl share. For example, they're both prolific writers and they are both bisexual. So she believes that her daughter was Virginia Woolf in her past life. In our 6th spot, we have the ballerina. When this next boy was around 3 or 4 years old, he kept talking about how he used to be a ballerina. He would go on and on about how he would perform on stage. He even shared intense detail about the lights, to the music, and even the crowd. But sadly, he also remembers how he died. He told his mom that he was attending a party on a boat when he fell into the water and presumably drowned. He then said that the next thing he remembered was being here with his new family. Now, of course, his mom was just like, oh, haha, my son has such a wild imagination. But a week later, when his dad came home from a business trip, he told him the exact same story with the exact same detail that he told his mom. And that's pretty odd for a kid that age. They make up stuff all the time and then forget about it within a couple of days. Clearly, this means that his son was reincarnated. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with JB, not Justin Bieber. When this kid was 3 or 4, he randomly turned to his grandpa and said, JB, do you remember when we went bar hopping in Australia between island campaigns during the war, and I tried to flirt with the brown-haired Australian girl before I died on that island? Keep in mind, this came from a 3-year-old. What kid that age, first of all, knows what bar hopping is, and also knows what war campaigns are? Like what? Now obviously his grandpa was taken aback from this because A, JB was his grandpa's initials that he went by, but that little kid didn't know, he only ever called him grandpa. And 2, apparently during World War II, him and his friends would go bar hopping, and one time one of his friends tried to flirt with a brown-haired Australian girl. He later passed away in the Philippines. His grandpa never told his family that story before, let alone his grandson. So that's freaking weird. Maybe he really is the reincarnation of his grandpa's friend. Coming in at number 4, we have the Scottish pub. One day, a family in Scotland decided to stop off at a pub in a small village. Immediately upon arriving, their 4-year-old son goes, "Oh, my favorite place!" And his family was all like, "Haha, oh that's so cute," because he's never been there before. First off, his dad needed to use the bathroom, and the boy then took his dad's hand and was like, "I'll just take you there." And without any help, he brought his dad to the bathroom, which, may I add, was tricky to anyone that hasn't been there before because it's not labeled and it's hidden behind this wall in the back. After that, more unusual things started to happen. Like, there was no fireplace in the pub, but the little boy was all like, "I loved coming here and sitting beside the fire." And his family was like, "Okay, my dude, chill with the imagination, okay? There's no fireplace here." But he insisted that there used to be one against a wall, and then he pointed to the wall. The bar staff later said that that was true. There indeed was a fireplace there at some point. But wait, it gets freakier. The boy went on to talk about the owner of the place and his dear friend Fred. He was also right about this. Fred was the owner there but passed away over 10 years ago. So how did this kid know all this information? Obviously, he used to visit this pub a lot in his past life. Moving on to number 3, we have the kid who solved his own murder. This story will forever leave me baffled. Like, I heard about this when I was young and it's constantly on my mind. I'm serious. It first began when a 3-year-old boy started telling his parents that he was murdered in his past life. He claims that he was killed after someone took an axe to his head. What's freaky is that this boy had a long birthmark on his head. It was in the same location he said that he got axed. I've said this before in other videos, but birthmarks are said to be like a symbol of how you died in your past life. Anyways, his parents didn't believe him until he literally took them to the village he said he once lived in and took them to the exact spot where he got killed. Well, guess what? After digging in that area, they unearthed a skeleton of a man with an axe wound in his skull. Does not stop there though, folks, it does not. The kid also remembered who the killer was and his full name. They then confronted him and eventually he did admit to the crime. So this dude literally got reincarnated to come back and get revenge on his killer. It's pretty badass. In our second spot, we have Banjo. This next kid might be the reincarnation of his uncle. So basically, he was 5 years old at the time and randomly asked his mom where Banjo was. Banjo was the name of her family dog that she grew up with, but she never told her son about him because he passed away in a tragic way. Basically, one day during a flash flood, her brother got stuck in the middle of a raging river. He was sitting on a rock and Banjo jumped into the water to try and rescue him, but sadly he got swept away by the current. Rest in peace, Banjo, we don't deserve dogs. Anyways, her brother was very distraught about losing Banjo. Those two were super close. And then, sadly, 2 years later after the incident, he lost his life while cycling. Now, how did her son know about Banjo? Well, she believes that he is the reincarnation of her brother. In fact, apparently the two both have eerie similarities. For example, they both like the same things. They have the same favorite color and like the same food. And they both like to sing. So she literally gave birth to her brother, which is really weird to say when I put it that way. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Chicago Fire. This next story was shared by a woman named Erica Ruhlman. When her son Luke was 5 years old, he would always say that he remembers he was once a girl named Pam. He described himself as having black hair and wore earrings like his mom did. When his mom asked more about this, he said he used to be Pam and then died and went to heaven. He then said, and I quote, "Eventually God pushed me back down and when I woke up, I was a baby and you named me Luke." Luke also said that he used to live in Chicago where he would take the train a lot, but he said he passed away in a fire. When talking about it, Luke made the motion indicating that he jumped out of the window, or Pam jumped out of the window. After Erica did some research, she found that in March of 1993, the Paxton Hotel in Chicago had a fire. The freakiest part? A woman named Pam Robinson died after she jumped out the window trying to escape the fire. Coincidence? I think not.